The old house smelled of dust and secrets. It wasn't a foul smell, not one of decay, but the dry, papery scent of things left untouched for too long. Of polished wood that hadn't seen polish in a decade, of leather-bound books whose pages were slowly turning to brittle, yellowed wafers, and of the faint, lingering aroma of my father's pipe tobacco, a ghost of a scent that clung to the heavy velvet curtains like a memory. I ran my hand along the mahogany mantelpiece, my fingers coming away with a fine gray film. The air in the room was heavy and still, the temperature a cool that had nothing to do with the mild October afternoon outside and everything to do with the absence of life, of warmth, of a hearth that had long gone cold. The only sound was the solemn, rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, each swing of its pendulum marking a second closer to the moment we all dreaded. I was Eleanor. Ellie, to the very few people I let get close. At 32, I was the designated fulcrum of the family, the one who balanced the warring factions of my older brother, Mark, and my younger sister, Chloe. I stood by the fireplace, my stomach a tight, cold knot. Across the room, sprawled in our father's favorite wingback chair as if he were already king of the castle, was Mark. He was 40, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. The fabric made a soft, expensive rustling sound every time he shifted his weight. He was checking his phone, his thumb swiping impatiently across the glass screen, the faint blue light illuminating a face set in lines of practiced corporate authority. He radiated an aura of expensive cologne and contained impatience. He hadn't looked at me or Chloe since he'd arrived, his presence sucking the remaining warmth from the room. Chloe was a whirlwind of nervous energy by the window, her back to us. She was 27, but in moments like this, she seemed much younger. She was picking at a loose thread on the sleeve of her worn denim jacket, the repetitive, scraping sound of her nail against the fabric grating on my already frayed nerves. The late afternoon sun slanted through the grimy window pane, catching the dust motes dancing in the air and setting her fiery red hair ablaze. She smelled of rain and something vaguely sweet, like the clove cigarettes she still smoked despite promising to quit 1,000 times. She kept flexing her fingers, the leather of her scuffed boots creaking softly on the hardwood floor. We were a trinity of grief and resentment, bound together by blood and the imposing, silent house that had shaped us, and in many ways, broken us. The silence was finally shattered by the heavy, authoritative sound of the front door opening and closing. The grandfather clock seemed to pause its ticking for a heartbeat. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed on the marble floor of the foyer. Mr. Abernathy. My father's lawyer for over 30 years. He appeared in the doorway of the living room, a stooped, gray man in a rumpled gray suit. He carried a worn leather briefcase that smelled of old paper and bitter coffee. The clasps clicked open with a sound that felt as final as a gavel strike. Mark. Eleanor. Chloe, he said, his voice a dry rustle. He nodded at each of us in turn, his eyes, magnified by thick glasses, holding no warmth, only a tired professionalism. My condolences once again. Shall we begin? Mark pocketed his phone with a sigh of put-upon tolerance. Let's get this over with, Abernathy. I have a 2 o'clock flight to catch. The air in the room seemed to crackle with his arrogance. Chloe turned from the window, her green eyes flashing. Of course you do, Mark. Always somewhere more important to be. Her voice was tight, laced with a familiar, defensive sarcasm. Chloe, please, I murmured, the peacemaker, the broken record. My voice felt small and thin in the cavernous room. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being stirred. He settled himself at my father's enormous, imposing desk, the dark wood gleaming under the single lamp he switched on. The sudden pool of yellow light made the rest of the room seem darker, pushing us into the shadows. He pulled out a thick manila envelope, the paper crisp and new. The sound it made sliding across the desk was impossibly loud. Richard was very specific in his instructions, the lawyer began, his fingers fumbling with the seal. The tearing of the paper was a violent, final sound. It felt like a part of our past was being ripped open. I am to read his last will and testament to the three of you, together, in this house. No copies are to be made until the terms have been fully executed. I held my breath, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. I could feel the tension radiating from my siblings. Mark leaned forward slightly, a predator scenting a kill. Chloe crossed her arms over her chest, a shield against whatever was coming. Mr. Abernathy put on a pair of reading glasses and began to read. The legal language was dense, a thicket of jargon about executors and beneficiaries and trusts. He droned on about my father's portfolio, his properties, his various assets. It was a significant fortune, more than I had ever really allowed myself to think about. I felt a faint, detached surprise. My father had been a quiet, intensely private man, a surgeon whose life revolved around his work, especially after our mother died. We knew he was successful, but the numbers Mr. Abernathy was reading were staggering. I glanced at Mark. A small, smug smile was playing on his lips. He saw this as his birthright, the just reward for being the son who followed in our father's footsteps, if not into medicine, then into the world of cutthroat finance. Then, Mr. Abernathy paused. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a flicker of something that looked like discomfort, maybe even pity, crossing his face. The air grew thick and heavy again. Now, he said, his voice softer, we come to the primary clause. The distribution of the main estate. He put his glasses back on, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. My father had never been a man for simplicity. He loved control, he loved games, and he loved to be the one who held all the cards. This felt like his final, masterful move from beyond the grave. I, Richard James Peterson, the lawyer read, his voice now a monotone, as if to distance himself from the words, being of sound mind and body, do hereby decree that my entire residual estate, including all properties, stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, shall be divided equally among my biological children. He stopped. The words hung in the air, echoing in the oppressive silence. Biological children. A strange, clinical, and entirely unnecessary phrase. There were only 3 of us. Mark scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. Well, that's us. What's the catch, Abernathy? There's always a catch with him. Mr. Abernathy didn't look up from the page. He continued reading. It has long been a source of private concern to me that one of the 3 individuals I have raised as my own, Mark Peterson, Eleanor Peterson, and Chloe Peterson, may not share my bloodline. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I looked from Chloe's wide, horrified eyes to Mark's face, which had gone from smug confidence to a mask of pure, stunned disbelief. The smell of old paper and dust suddenly seemed suffocating. What the hell is this? Mark's voice was a low growl, the sound of thunder rumbling in the distance. He stood up, the expensive suit rustling in protest. Is this some kind of sick joke? Please, Mark, let me finish, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice firm. He was just a messenger, but he suddenly looked very, very small behind that enormous desk. He cleared his throat and read on. Therefore, the execution of this will is contingent upon a final, definitive resolution to this matter. Years ago, I commissioned a discreet genetic test to put my mind at ease. Unfortunately, the report I received was damaged in a laboratory accident, rendering the final conclusion illegible. A smudge of ink, a drop of water, the universe's cruel little joke on me. That report is located in the top left-hand drawer of my desk. Every eye in the room swiveled to the desk drawer. It was a simple piece of wood, but it had suddenly become a Pandora's box, holding a secret that could shatter our family. My last wish, and the non-negotiable condition for any of you to inherit, is this: you must, together, submit to a new, legally binding DNA test, administered by an independent firm of my executor's choosing. The results will be definitive. My estate will be divided equally only between those who are proven, by modern science, to be my biological offspring. Any child proven not to be of my blood shall receive a token sum of $1,000, and my deepest sympathies for the deception they have unknowingly been a part of. The room was utterly silent, save for the relentless tick-tock of the clock. $1,000. Sympathies. The words were a slap in the face, a calculated, cruel act of posthumous revenge. For what? I couldn't imagine. My mind was reeling, a chaotic storm of confusion and fear. One of us? It was impossible. It had to be. We had our mother's eyes, our father's chin, his stubbornness, his temper. We were a mosaic of the two of them. Weren't we? Chloe was the first to speak, her voice a raw, trembling whisper. He thought one of us wasn't his? All this time? The hurt in her voice was a physical thing, a shard of glass in the room. She looked so small, so betrayed. Of course, the suspicion would fall on her. The wild child, the artist, the one who had never quite fit the Peterson mold. Mark's shock had morphed into white-hot rage. His face was blotchy, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of the chair. This is insane. It's a character assassination. From his own grave. He turned, his furious gaze landing, inevitably, on Chloe. You. This is because of you. All your running around, your lifestyle. You were always a disappointment to him. Me? Chloe's voice rose, cracking with disbelief and pain. You think I'm the one? Just because I didn't want to become a corporate shark like you or a ghost like Ellie. The insult, though probably not intended, struck me with the force of a physical blow. A ghost. Was that how she saw me? Invisible? Stop it, I said, finding my voice at last. It came out stronger than I expected. Both of you. This is what he wanted. Don't you see? He's pitting us against each other, even now. It's his last great manipulation. Mr. Abernathy finally looked up, his face etched with a weary sadness. The will is ironclad. I've been over it a dozen times. Richard was meticulous. There are no loopholes. You either submit to the test, or you all forfeit the entire inheritance, in which case it will be donated to the medical university. Forfeit. The word hung there. Billions of dollars, gone. Our home, our history, our legacy, handed over to a university. The alternative was to play our father's sick game, to roll the dice and risk one of us being cast out, disowned, with nothing but $1,000 and a lifetime of lies. The grandfather clock ticked on, each sound a hammer blow, counting down the seconds of the life we had known, a life that was now, irrevocably, a lie. The air was cold, the light was fading, and the smell of secrets was so thick I could taste it on my tongue, bitter and old. The lawyer's words hung in the air, a poisonous fog that settled into our bones. The room felt like a tomb, and we were the ghosts, haunted by the words of a man who was supposed to have loved us. Mark began to pace, his expensive shoes making sharp, angry sounds on the polished floorboards. Each step was a punctuation mark in a furious, silent tirade. The scent of his cologne was sharp, almost acrid, a stark contrast to the musty air of the house. A test, he spat, the words clipped and brutal. He stopped and pointed a trembling finger at the desk drawer. And that broken report. Let's see it. Let's see the damn thing. He strode to the desk, his movements jerky with rage. Mr. Abernathy flinched back slightly. Mark, I'm not sure that's wise. I don't care what's wise. Mark roared, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. He yanked at the drawer. It was locked. He rattled it furiously, the sound of wood straining against metal filling the silence. The key, Abernathy. Now. The lawyer sighed, a long, defeated sound. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and produced a small, ornate brass key. It looked ancient. He slid it across the gleaming surface of the desk. Mark snatched it, his hand shaking. The key scraped against the lock, and with a loud, grating click, the drawer sprang open. We all leaned in, drawn by a morbid, irresistible gravity. The air inside the drawer was stale, smelling of old ink and decaying paper. Inside, nestled among neat stacks of bank statements and old passports, was a single, cream-colored folder. It looked innocuous, ordinary. but I could feel a cold energy radiating from it, a malevolence that was pure Dad. Mark lifted it out with a reverence that was unsettling. His fingers, usually so steady and decisive, fumbled with the flap. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, a laboratory report from a company I'd never heard of, dated 15 years ago. It was covered in technical jargon, charts, and strings of letters I didn't understand. And there, in the center of the page, under the heading Conclusion, was the damage. A large, ugly, dark blue blotch. It looked like a fountain pen had exploded, right over the most important words on the page. The ink had soaked through, warping the paper, obscuring everything. You could make out a few letters around the edges, a P, a tie, but nothing that formed a coherent word. It was a perfect, calculated piece of theatrical cruelty. A broken report. "Son of a bitch," Mark whispered, his voice raw with a new kind of fury. Not just anger, but the impotent rage of a man who had been played. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time I'd ever seen. He knew. He sat on this for 15 years, knowing it was useless, just so he could do this to us. Chloe came closer, peering over his shoulder. Her earlier defensiveness had been replaced by a pale, fragile look. She reached out a hesitant finger and touched the edge of the inkblot, as if to see if it was still wet. "So, it's real. He really did this." The sense of betrayal in her voice was so profound it made my own chest ache in sympathy. For all her rebellion, Chloe had always craved Dad's approval the most. This was a deeper wound for her than for any of us. I looked at the report, at the meaningless charts and the damning inkblot, and a different feeling began to surface within me, rising up through the shock and the fear. It was a slow-burning anger. "He wanted us to find this," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "He wanted us to see it. This is part of the game. The report is the proof of his suspicion, and the inkblot is the drama. He's directing this whole thing." Mark slammed the report down on the desk. The paper fluttered, a wounded bird. "I don't care. I am not taking some damn test and letting this family's dirty laundry get aired out because of his paranoia. There has to be another way." He started pacing again, the frantic energy returning. "We can test the will. We say he wasn't of sound mind. This is proof. A sane man doesn't do this to his own children." Mr. Abernathy shook his head slowly, his expression grim. "You won't win, Mark. Richard had 2 separate psychiatric evaluations in the month before he signed this. He prepared for that. He was, by every legal and medical definition, of perfectly sound mind. He was just meticulous and cruel." The last 2 words were spoken almost under his breath, a rare crack in his professional facade. The room fell silent again, the tick-tock of the clock measuring out our dwindling options. The sun was lower now, and long, distorted shadows stretched across the floor like grasping fingers. The air was getting colder. I wrapped my arms around myself, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was Chloe who broke the stalemate. She had sunk into one of the dusty armchairs, looking small and lost. "So we do it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We take the test." Mark whirled on her. "Are you crazy? Have you thought this through? One of us gets disowned. Exiled. Probably you." "Maybe," Chloe said, lifting her chin, a spark of her old fire returning. "And maybe not. But what's the alternative, Mark? We walk away with nothing? We let him win completely? We let him destroy everything our mother helped build because we're too scared to face the truth?" She stood up, her small frame filled with a sudden, surprising strength. "I don't know about you, but I'm tired of being scared of him. I was scared of him my whole life. I'm not going to be scared of his ghost." Her words hit me hard. She was right. Our entire lives had been a dance around our father's moods, his expectations, his silent, suffocating disapproval. Mark had danced by becoming a perfect copy of him. Chloe had danced by running in the opposite direction. And I had danced by trying to stand perfectly still, hoping not to be noticed at all. A ghost. Maybe she was right. An idea began to form in my mind, a wild, desperate gamble. It was a long shot, built on a foundation of years of mistrust, but it was the only way I could see out of the trap he had set for us. "There's a third option," I said, and my own voice surprised me with its steadiness. Mark and Chloe both turned to look at me. It was rare for me to take the lead, and my intervention had clearly startled them. Even Mr. Abernathy looked up with interest. "We take the test," I said, laying out the thought as it came to me. "We do exactly what the will says. We fulfill the condition." I paused, letting the words sink in. "But we make a pact. Right here, right now." Mark narrowed his eyes, suspicious. "What kind of pact?" "The three of us," I said, looking from his hard, skeptical face to Chloe's hopeful one. "We sign an agreement, a contract. A legally binding one that Mr. Abernathy can draft for us right now. It will state that no matter what the results of that test are, we split everything 3 ways. Exactly as we thought it would be this morning. The inheritance, the house, all of it. We take the money and we divide it equally. No matter what." Chloe's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding, of hope, dawning in them. Mark, however, just stared at me. "Why would we do that?" "If it's her," he said, gesturing contemptuously at Chloe, "why would you and I give her a third of our inheritance?" The possessive pronoun was not lost on me. "Our inheritance." "Because," I said, stepping forward, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "Because we are his children, not his pawns. Because this is not about the money, it's about him trying to control us, to break us, one last time. And I am not going to let him. If one of us is cast out, we all lose. He wins. The only way we win is if we stand together. If we take his weapon, the money, and refuse to let it be used against us." I took a deep breath, the dusty air filling my lungs. "We make the results of his stupid, cruel test completely irrelevant. We nullify his final act." A long, heavy silence followed. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant sound of a car passing on the street. In the bubble of our grief and anger, the outside world had ceased to exist. Chloe was the first to move. She walked over to me and stood beside me, a silent declaration of solidarity. "I'm in," she said softly. "Ellie's right." We both looked at Mark. He was staring at the floor, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. I could see the wheels turning in his head. The financier, the strategist, was weighing the odds. The risk of losing everything versus the certainty of getting 2/3 was a powerful motivator. But I could also see something else in his eyes, a flicker of fear. What if it wasn't Chloe? What if, by some impossible twist of fate, it was him? The thought was so absurd it was almost laughable, but in the surreal atmosphere of that room, anything seemed possible. The risk, however small, was there. Finally, he looked up, his gaze meeting mine. His face was pale, his arrogance stripped away, leaving something more raw and human. "You really think he was that much of a bastard?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I know he was," I said, and the simple, honest statement held the weight of a lifetime of experience. He took a long, shuddering breath, the sound of a man making a decision that went against every one of his instincts. "All right," he said, the word clipped. "Draw it up, Abernathy. We'll sign it. We take the test, and we split everything 3 ways. No matter what." Mr. Abernathy, who had been watching this exchange with a kind of weary fascination, simply nodded. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. The scratching sound of the pen on the paper as he began to write was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a countermove being made, of a new set of rules being written for a game we had never asked to play. For the first time that day, a tiny, fragile sliver of hope pierced through the suffocating gloom. We were still trapped in our father's web, but for the first time, it felt like we were fighting back, together. The days that followed were a strange, suspended limbo. Mr. Abernathy drew up the contract, a simple but ironclad document that we each signed on the polished, unforgiving surface of our father's desk. The three of our signatures, so different from one another, Mark's a sharp, aggressive slash, Chloe's a looping, artistic flourish, mine a neat, careful script, looked like a fragile alliance on the page. The act of signing felt both momentous and hollow. We had made our pact, but the trust it was built on was as brittle as old parchment. The DNA test was scheduled for the following week. A sterile, impersonal affair at a downtown clinic that smelled of antiseptic and quiet anxiety. We went separately. I didn't want to see them, didn't want to share the cold intimacy of the waiting room. The procedure itself was quick, a simple swab of the cheek, but the emotional weight of it was crushing. A woman in a crisp white lab coat, her face a mask of professional neutrality, took my sample. As the soft cotton swab scraped against the inside of my mouth, I felt a profound sense of violation. A stranger was taking a piece of my very essence, the code that defined me, to be judged against the man who had raised me. It felt like a final, posthumous intrusion from my father. Afterward, we were told the results would take 7 to 10 business days. It sounded like a lifetime. 10 days to live with a question mark hanging over the very core of my identity. We retreated from each other, back to our separate lives, but the unspoken question was a constant, humming presence between us. We communicated through curt text messages, logistical necessities about the estate, but the easy camaraderie we'd occasionally managed to find in the past was gone, replaced by a tense, wary politeness. Every phone call, every shared glance, was shadowed by the secret one of us was unknowingly keeping. I found myself unable to settle. I worked from home, my job as a grant writer usually a welcome distraction, but the words on my screen blurred into meaningless patterns. I wandered through my small apartment, the air thick with my own unease. The silence was the worst. It gave my mind too much room to roam, to replay every memory, every conversation, searching for clues I had never thought to look for. I started to see our family not as a unit, but as three separate, orbiting bodies, each with a different relationship to the son that had been our father. Mark had always been the closest, basking in the warmth of approval, reflecting our father's light. He was the son, the heir, the one who had made the right choices. I remembered him as a boy, desperately trying to impress Dad with his grades, his athletic achievements. I could still hear the rare, coveted words of praise from our father, "Good work, son," and see the look of pure, unadulterated relief on Mark's face. His entire identity was built on being Richard Peterson's son. The thought of that being a lie was so catastrophic, it was almost unthinkable. Chloe was the opposite, a comet streaking away from the center, her path erratic and fiery. Every choice she made seemed designed to be the antithesis of what our father wanted. He wanted a daughter who was a debutante. She got tattoos and played bass in a punk band. He wanted her to study business. She went to art school and dropped out. I had always seen it as rebellion, but now I wondered if it was something else. A preemptive rejection. If you're the one who pushes away first, it hurts less when they finally let you go. Had she sensed something, on some subconscious level? A feeling of not quite belonging? The thought sent a chill through me. And then there was me. The ghost. I was the planet in the middle, caught in a stable, unremarkable orbit. Never causing enough trouble to be a disappointment like Chloe, never achieving enough to be a source of pride like Mark. I was just there. The quiet one, the responsible one. The one who remembered birthdays and mediated arguments and absorbed the family's ambient tension like a sponge. Dad had rarely focused his intense energy on me, and I had been grateful for the benign neglect. But now I questioned it. Had he ignored me because I was simply the uninteresting middle child, or was it because he looked at me and felt nothing, no connection, no spark of himself? One rainy afternoon, unable to bear the silence of my apartment any longer, I drove back to the old house. I had the key. We were all supposed to be sorting through his things, but no one had been able to face it. I let myself in, the familiar smell of dust and old memories wrapping around me like a shroud. The house was cold, colder than I remembered. The silence was absolute, the grandfather clock having finally wound down, its stillness more unnerving than its constant ticking. I went straight to his study, the room where our lives had been upended. The broken report was still on the desk where Mark had slammed it down. I picked it up, the paper cool and smooth against my fingertips. I stared at the inkblot, as if my will alone could make it disappear and reveal the truth. It was a perfect void, a black hole in the center of our family story. My father was a man of meticulous records. I knew he kept everything. If there was a clue, it would be in this room. I started opening drawers, cabinets, boxes. It felt like a desecration, sifting through the private archaeology of his life. I found old tax returns, medical school diplomas, photographs of him as a young, smiling man I barely recognized. And I found things about my mother. She had died when I was 16, a sudden, brutal illness that had stolen her from us in less than a year. My memories of her were softened by time, a watercolor painting of a kind, gentle woman who smelled of lavender and baked bread. But in Dad's desk, I found a different version of her. I found a small, leather-bound journal tucked away in a locked cash box I had to pry open with a letter opener. Her handwriting was elegant, a looping cursive that was so at odds with the words on the page. The entries were from the year before Mark was born. They weren't a diary of a happy newlywed, but the confessions of a lonely, frightened young woman. She wrote about my father's long hours at the hospital, his ambition, his emotional distance. She described a marriage that was cold and formal, a partnership of convenience for a rising star surgeon who needed a respectable wife. Richard is a good man, I suppose, one entry read. He provides. He is respected. But he is a house with no one inside. I knock on the door and no one answers. I am so terribly, terribly lonely. My heart ached for this younger version of my mother, a woman I had never known. I kept reading, my hands trembling. And then I found the name. Michael. He was a resident at the hospital where Dad worked. A friend. At first, the entries were innocent. Michael made me laugh today. It felt so strange to laugh like that. But as the weeks went on, the tone changed. The friendship deepened into something more. There were descriptions of stolen conversations, shared lunches, a growing emotional intimacy that was so clearly absent from her marriage. He sees me, she wrote. When I talk to him, I feel like I am a person, not just a surgeon's wife. Is it so wrong to want to be seen? There was no explicit confession of an affair. The journal was more a record of emotional turmoil, of a woman torn between duty and a desperate need for connection. But the implication was there, a ghost in the margins of her elegant script. The journal ended abruptly a few months later, before any of our births were mentioned. There was no explanation. I sat back in my father's cold leather chair, the small journal clutched in my hand. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the weight of this 40-year-old secret. This changed everything. It wasn't some abstract possibility anymore. There was a name. A reason. A man who had made my lonely mother laugh. Did my father know? Had he found this journal? Was that the source of the suspicion he had carried like a cancer for all these years? Had he spent his life looking at his children, wondering which of them was the product of this stolen happiness, this quiet betrayal? And then, a more terrifying thought. He had the test done 15 years ago. I was 17 then. Chloe was 12. Mark was 25, already out of the house, starting his career. Why then? What had prompted it after all those years? Had he found the journal then? Or had something else happened? A chance encounter? A careless word? I looked around the room, at the portrait of my father on the wall, his expression severe and unreadable. He had been a man of science, of facts and evidence. He wouldn't have acted on a mere feeling. He would have needed proof. The damaged report was his failed attempt at that proof. But his suspicion had lived on, festering, until it had become the final, poisonous legacy he would leave us. I carefully placed the journal back in the box and closed the drawer. This was a secret I would keep, at least for now. Telling Mark and Chloe would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. It would only feed the paranoia, give a face to the phantom that was haunting us. It was better to wait. To let the sterile, scientific truth of the DNA test have the final say. But as I left the house, locking the door behind me, the cold, heavy weight of my mother's journal felt like it was still in my hands. The story was no longer just about our father's cruelty. It was about our mother's secret sadness, and the very real possibility that one of us was the living embodiment of it. The 7 to 10 business days now felt like an eternity, a countdown to a truth I was no longer sure I wanted to know. The waiting was a physical entity, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Every morning I woke with a jolt of anxiety, my first conscious thought being, is today the day? The world outside my window seemed to be moving in slow motion, the crisp autumn leaves taking an agonizingly long time to fall. I tried to lose myself in work, in books, in mindless television, but the question was a constant hum beneath the surface of everything. Who am I? Who are we? On the 8th business day, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, a local area code I didn't recognize. My heart leaped into my throat. I answered, my hands so slick with sweat I almost dropped the phone. Is this Eleanor Peterson? A clipped, professional voice asked. Yes, I managed to say, my own voice a dry croak. This is Sarah from the Northwood Diagnostic Center. We have the results of your family's kinship analysis ready. As per the instructions from Mr. Abernethy's office, a digital copy has been sent to his secure email, and a hard copy will be delivered to him by courier this afternoon. He will be in touch with you to arrange the formal disclosure. Thank you, I whispered, and hung up. I slid down the wall in my hallway, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The linoleum was cold against my skin. It was done. The answer was sitting in an email inbox, a sealed envelope on a courier's truck. The abstract dread had solidified into a concrete, terrifying reality. It was here. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. It was a group text from Mark. Abernethy's office just called. He wants to meet tomorrow. 10 a.m. At the house. Chloe replied within seconds. Okay. Just one word, but I could feel the weight of 1,000 emotions behind it. I typed back, see you then. My fingers felt numb, disconnected from my body. The rest of the day and the sleepless night that followed were a blur. I don't remember eating. I don't remember sleeping. I remember the feeling of the walls of my apartment closing in on me, the air growing thin and hard to breathe. I paced the floors, tracing the same path over and over, a caged animal. Every possible scenario played out in my head. If it was Chloe, Mark's smug, I told you so expression would be unbearable. Her devastation would be a gaping wound in our family. Could our pact, our flimsy paper contract, possibly be enough to stitch that wound closed? I pictured her walking away, not just from the money, but from us, from the very idea of family. If it was me, the ghost, the quiet one, what would that feel like? To be untethered from the only history I had ever known. Would it be a relief? A liberation from the weight of the Peterson name? Or would it be a terrifying void, a free fall into nothingness? I looked at my reflection in the dark window, at my face, a face I had always seen as a combination of my parents. If I wasn't his, then whose features was I seeing? A stranger's? My mother's secret lover, Michael? The thought made me feel dizzy, nauseous. And if it was Mark? The idea was still so outlandish it felt like fiction. Mark, the firstborn, the heir apparent. Mark, who had modeled his entire life, his personality, his ambition, on our father. To take that away from him would be more than just disinheriting him. It would be an obliteration of his entire identity. He wouldn't just lose his past, he would lose his present and his future. He would break. I was certain of it. And what would be left in the aftermath? The next morning, I drove to the house in a daze. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, the air cold and damp. The house looked more imposing than ever, a grim mausoleum waiting to claim one of us. Mark's silver sedan was already parked in the driveway. Chloe's battered hatchback was pulled up on the lawn, as usual. I parked behind them, a neat, orderly line of impending doom. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and walked up the stone path. The door was unlocked. They were already in the living room, in the same spots they had occupied a week and a half ago, like actors in a play, reset to their starting positions. Mark was standing stiffly by the fireplace, his face pale and drawn. He was wearing another perfect suit, but it looked like armor today, not a symbol of success. Chloe was curled in the armchair, her knees drawn up to her chest, her face buried in her hands. The room was utterly silent. No one looked at me as I entered. The air was so thick with tension it felt like wading through water. Mr. Abernathy was once again at the desk. He didn't look up when I came in. On the desk in front of him was a single, crisp, white envelope. It lay there, stark against the dark wood, a beacon of terrible knowledge. He looked older today, more tired. The weight of our family's dysfunction seemed to be settling on his stooped shoulders. I took my place, standing by the mantelpiece again, my fingers gripping the cold, dusty marble for support. For several long minutes, no one spoke. The only sound was the frantic, desperate thumping of my own heart. Finally, Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. The sound was like a crack of thunder in the silence. As you know, he began, his voice low and heavy, I have the results of the DNA analysis. He placed a hand on the envelope but didn't open it. Before I disclose the findings, I want to reaffirm that the contract you all signed is legally sound and will be executed by my office in conjunction with the will. The financial distribution you agreed upon will be honored, regardless of the information contained in this document. He looked at each of us, his gaze lingering for a moment. Financially, you are protected. Emotionally, that is another matter. Mark made an impatient gesture. Just open it, Abernathy. For God's sake, let's get this over with. His voice was strained, a wire pulled too tight. Chloe didn't move, didn't look up. She seemed to have shrunk into herself, trying to disappear. Mr. Abernathy picked up the envelope. He held it for a moment, as if weighing it in his hand. He took out a silver letter opener, the same one I'd used to pry open my mother's secrets. The slice of the blade through the paper was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a life being severed. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. His eyes scanned it, his expression unreadable behind his thick glasses. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. I felt lightheaded, the room starting to tilt slightly. I focused on a crack in the ceiling plaster, trying to anchor myself. The analysis is definitive, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice a flat, emotionless drone that did nothing to soften the blow of the words that followed. It confirms with a certainty of 99.999% that Richard Peterson was the biological father of Eleanor Peterson. My knees almost buckled. A wave of relief so profound, so dizzying, washed over me that I had to grab the mantelpiece to stay upright. It's not me. The thought was selfish and overwhelming. It's not me. I took a shaky breath, the air flooding my lungs. I was still a Peterson. I still belonged. Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice unwavering. The analysis also confirms, with the same degree of certainty, that Richard Peterson was the biological father of Chloe Peterson. Chloe's head snapped up. Her face was streaked with tears I hadn't seen fall. Her eyes, wide and luminous with shock, met mine. It wasn't her. All the years of being the outsider, the disappointment, the one who didn't fit in, and she was his. She had always been his. A choked, strangled sob escaped her lips, a sound of pain and vindication all at once. And then, there was only one person left. The room was deathly quiet. I didn't want to look at Mark, but I couldn't stop myself. He stood frozen by the fireplace, his face completely drained of color. He looked like a statue, a man carved from ice. He hadn't breathed. He hadn't moved. He was staring at Mr. Abernathy, his eyes wide with a dawning, uncomprehending horror. Mr. Abernathy took a deep breath. He looked directly at Mark, and for the first time, his professional mask slipped, revealing a deep, human pity. Mark, he said, his voice gentle. The test results show that you do not share the same paternal DNA markers as Eleanor and Chloe. Richard Peterson was not your biological father. The words dropped into the silent room like stones into a deep, dark well. For a moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to stop. The dust motes hung suspended in the air. My own heartbeat sounded like a drum in my ears. Then, Mark made a sound. It was a low, guttural noise of denial, of a reality being rejected with every fiber of his being. No, he whispered. The word was small, weak, pathetic. No. That's not right. The test is wrong. It's a mistake. There is no mistake, Mark, Mr. Abernathy said softly. The lab is the best in the country. The results are conclusive. No. Mark's voice rose to a full-throated roar, a sound of pure, primal agony. It wasn't anger. It was something far deeper. It was the sound of a man's entire world being ripped apart at the seams. You're lying. This is a trick. It's her, he screamed, his arm shooting out to point a shaking finger at Chloe. It was always her. It's not, Mark, Chloe said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her tears. She had gotten to her feet and was looking at her brother with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was pity. It's a lie, he bellowed, his face contorting, the veins in his neck standing out. He looked like a cornered animal. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, desperate. Ellie, tell them. It's a mistake. Tell them. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, my own tears starting to fall. I was crying for him. For the golden boy whose entire world had just turned to ash. He stumbled back, away from us, his hand clutching at his chest as if he'd been shot. He looked around the room, at the furniture, the portraits, the history that he had always believed was his. His gaze was wild, uncomprehending. He wasn't just a son who had lost his father, he was a man who had lost himself. He stumbled towards the door, bumping into a table, sending a porcelain lamp crashing to the floor. The sound of it shattering was like a final, definitive punctuation mark on the end of our family. He didn't even seem to notice. He just kept going, fumbling with the doorknob, and then he was gone, the front door slamming shut behind him with a boom that shook the very foundations of the house. We were left in the ringing silence, with the wreckage of the lamp on the floor and the wreckage of our brother's life somewhere out in the cold, gray morning. The truth was out. And it was 1,000 times more devastating than any of us could have ever imagined. The echo of the slamming door faded, leaving a silence that was heavier and more profound than any that had come before. It was a vacuum, filled with the ghost of Mark's anguish and the sharp, clean scent of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. The shattered pieces of the porcelain lamp lay scattered across the oriental rug, a stark, white wound against the deep reds and blues. Chloe and I just stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of Mark's car tires squealing as he peeled out of the driveway and sped away. Mr. Abernathy slowly, deliberately, folded the report and slid it back into its envelope. The crisp sound of the paper was an anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. He looked at us, his old, tired eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to go beyond professional duty. I am truly sorry, he said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. I knew your father for a very long time. I knew he was a difficult man. I never imagined this level of calculated destruction. Chloe let out a shaky breath and wiped at her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand. What do we do now? She whispered, her voice small. She looked at me, her eyes wide and lost. For once, she had no sarcastic retort, no defensive shield. She was just a younger sister looking to her older one for an answer I didn't have. We give him space, I said, though the words felt hollow. He needs time. We all do. Time for what? Chloe's voice was sharp with a new, raw edge. Time to accept that his whole life has been a lie? That the man he worshipped, the man he tried so hard to be, wasn't even his father? How do you come back from that, Ellie? I had no answer. I looked at the envelope on the desk, the neat, typed words inside that had detonated our lives. My father, Richard Peterson, was not his father. Then who was? My mind immediately went to the journal. To Michael, the resident who made my mother laugh. Mark was the oldest. The timing fit. Was he the living, breathing proof of my mother's secret happiness? A happiness that had been paid for with a lifetime of deception? The pact we had signed, the one that had felt so clever and defiant, now seemed like a cruel joke. We had protected the money, but we had done nothing to protect ourselves from the truth. The money was safe, but we were in ruins. Mr. Abernathy began to pack his briefcase, his movements slow and methodical. The estate will proceed as per your signed agreement. My office will handle the liquidation of assets and the division of funds. It will take some time. I will be in touch. He snapped the clasps on his briefcase shut. If you need anything, if Mark needs anything, please, do not hesitate to call. He gave us a final, sorrowful look, and then he let himself out, the front door closing with a soft, respectful click behind him. We were alone. Just the two of us in the vast, silent house that legally, according to our father's will, now belonged entirely to us. The thought made me feel sick. Chloe walked over to the shattered lamp and nudged a piece of porcelain with the toe of her boot. He loved this lamp, she said, her voice distant. Mom bought it on their honeymoon in Italy. He told me once that it was the only thing of hers he couldn't stand to put away. She looked up at me, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He lied about everything, didn't he? Not just to us. He lied to himself. I think he had to, I said, my voice thick. Maybe it was the only way he could live with it. We spent the rest of the day in a strange, silent tandem. We didn't talk about Mark, or the will, or the future. Instead, we started to clean. I found a dustpan and brush and carefully swept up the pieces of the broken lamp. Chloe went to the kitchen and came back with a bucket of warm, soapy water and a sponge. She started washing the grime from the window panes. The rhythmic, squeaking sound of the sponge against the glass was oddly comforting. We worked our way through the house, room by room. It wasn't about sorting or dividing possessions. It was something more fundamental. We were scrubbing away the layers of dust and neglect, letting in light and air. We opened windows that had been sealed shut for years, the fresh, cold autumn air rushing in, chasing out the stale scent of secrets. We pulled dust cloths off furniture, revealing the beautiful, rich wood beneath. We were not grieving our father. We were performing an exorcism. As we worked, the house began to feel different. Lighter. Less oppressive. It was as if the building itself was taking a deep breath after years of being held captive by the heavy, suffocating presence of the man who had owned it. We found more pieces of our mother everywhere. In a box in the attic, we found her old paintbrushes and a half-finished canvas of a seascape, the colors still vibrant. Chloe held a brush in her hand, her expression one of wonder. I never knew she painted, she whispered. In a closet, tucked away behind my father's severe, dark suits, we found a box of her dresses. They were bright, colorful fabrics, silks and cottons and floral prints. Nothing like the muted, conservative clothes I remembered her wearing. It was a wardrobe belonging to a different woman, a more vibrant, joyful one. The picture of our family, the one I had held in my mind my entire life, was being dismantled piece by piece. Our father wasn't the stoic pillar of strength I'd imagined. He was a man consumed by bitterness and suspicion. Our mother wasn't just a gentle, faded memory, she was a woman of hidden passions and secret sorrows. And we, the three of us, were not the fixed points in the family constellation I had always believed. We were just people, flawed and broken and searching. Late that evening, exhausted and covered in dust, we sat on the living room floor and ordered a pizza, something we had never been allowed to do as children. Eating it out of the cardboard box, in the middle of the room, felt like an act of rebellion. What about the journal? Chloe asked suddenly, her voice quiet in the dim light. I froze, a piece of pizza halfway to my mouth. What journal? I tried to keep my voice even. She gave me a small, sad smile. Ellie, I'm not an idiot. I saw your face when Abernathy was reading the will that first day. The way you looked at the desk. You went looking, didn't you? You found something. I put the pizza down, the appetite gone. I took a deep breath and told her everything. About our mother's diary, her loneliness, the man named Michael who had made her laugh. I told her about the timing, how it lined up perfectly with Mark's birth. Chloe listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she was silent for a long time. So he's not a Peterson, she said finally. He's the son of the man our mother loved. Maybe the only man she ever really loved. She shook her head in disbelief. God, what a mess. What a horrible, beautiful, tragic mess. The doorbell rang, the sound jarring and loud in the quiet house. We looked at each other, startled. No one ever came to this house. I got up and went to the door, my heart pounding. Was it Mark? Had he come back? I looked through the peephole and saw a man I didn't recognize. He was about Mark's age, with kind eyes and a face that looked tired but gentle. He was holding a casserole dish, a plume of steam rising from under the aluminum foil. Confused, I opened the door. Hi, he said, with a hesitant smile. You must be Eleanor. I'm Ben. I live next door. He gestured with his head towards the neighboring house. I was so sorry to hear about your father. And, well, I heard the commotion earlier. The car. The slamming door. I just wanted to make sure you and your sister were okay. My wife made lasagna. I was so stunned by the simple act of kindness that I couldn't speak for a moment. Thank you, I finally managed. That's incredibly kind of you. It's nothing, he said. Look, I know it's none of my business, but your brother, he looked pretty torn up. If he needs to talk to someone, or if you do, I'm around. Just knock. He gave another small, kind smile, handed me the still warm dish, and walked back across the lawn. I closed the door, my throat tight with emotion. I carried the lasagna into the living room and set it on the floor next to the pizza box. A simple, neighborly gesture. A moment of human connection in the middle of our private apocalypse. It felt like a sign. Who was that? Chloe asked. The neighbor, I said. He brought us lasagna. Chloe stared at the dish, and then she started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a raw, wet, broken laugh that was full of grief and absurdity and a tiny, flickering spark of something else. Hope. I started laughing with her, and soon we were both crying and laughing at the same time, two sisters sitting on the floor of our broken home, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the terrifying, uncertain future. The pact we'd made was about more than money. I saw that now. It was about choosing each other. It was about refusing to play our father's game, even when the rules changed and the stakes became impossibly high. The real inheritance wasn't the fortune he'd left behind. It was the three of us. Broken, yes. But still here. Still a family. I didn't know if Mark would ever come back. I didn't know if we could ever fix what had been shattered. But as I sat there with my sister, in the house that was finally starting to feel like it could be a home, I knew we had to try. We had to build something new on the ruins of the old lies. It was the only way to truly be free of him. The only way to win.